The morning Thomas walked back into my life, I was wearing my sister's apron. I didn't know then that seeing him again would cost me the family I had spent my life protecting. The faded blue cotton, the tiny embroidered daisies along the pocket. I'd worn it 1,000 times since Caroline died. But that morning, standing in the bakery aisle, I felt the weight of it differently, like I was still playing a role I'd been cast in 37 years ago. I was reaching for whole wheat bread when I heard my name. Not Rebecca, Becca. Only one person in the world had ever called me that. I turned slowly, the loaf still in my hand, and there he was. Older, of course, silver hair where there used to be dark curls, but the same green eyes, the same crooked smile that used to make my stomach flip when I was 28. Thomas? His name came out softer than I intended, like a secret I'd been keeping. We stood there in the bread aisle, and for a moment I was 28 again, before Caroline got sick, before she made me promise, before I became the woman who raised someone else's children and slept in the guest room of a house that was never really mine. He told me he'd heard about David, said he was sorry. I nodded. David had been gone 5 years now. A good man, a grateful man, but never my husband. Not really. We'd shared a house, shared meals, shared the work of raising 2 children who called me Aunt Becca until they were old enough to understand what I'd given up. Thomas shifted the basket in his hands and asked if I had time for coffee. I should have said no. I should have smiled politely, said I had errands to run, walked away like I'd walked away 37 years ago when Caroline asked me to take care of her family. But I didn't. We sat in a corner booth at the diner on Maple Street, the same diner where we used to meet on Tuesday nights, back when Tuesdays were ours, back when I thought I knew what my life would look like. He told me he'd never married. Came close once, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. But it didn't feel right. I wrapped my hands around my mug, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. I told him I'd married David, that he probably knew that already. He said he'd heard, also heard it was complicated. Complicated. That was one word for it. Caroline's children had been 6 and 9 when she died, too young to lose their mother, too young to understand why their father needed help. Too young to know that their Aunt Becca had been in love with someone else when she made a deathbed promise to become their second mother. I told him the children had needed me, that Sarah and Michael had been so small. Thomas reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of mine. He asked what about what I needed. Nobody had asked me that in 37 years. I pulled my hand back, tucked it in my lap, told him the children were adults now. Sarah was 43, Michael was 40. They had their own families. He asked what I had. I wanted to say I had a life. I had a house that David left me. I had grandchildren who weren't really mine, but called me Grandma anyway. I had Sunday dinners and birthday parties, and a spot at the table that I'd earned through decades of showing up. But sitting across from Thomas, I couldn't say any of it, because none of it felt like mine. It felt like something I was still borrowing. We met 3 more times that month. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became a walk through the park, where the leaves were just starting to turn. Each time, I told myself it was just old friends catching up, nothing more. But my hands shook when I buttoned my coat, and I caught myself checking my reflection before I left the house. Sarah noticed first. She said I seemed distracted one Sunday, helping me clear the dinner plates, asked if everything was okay. I hesitated. Then I told her about Thomas. About the coffee, the lunches, the walks. She set down the plate she was holding, asked if I meant the Thomas, from before her father. I said we were just talking, that he was an old friend. She repeated the words back to me, her voice going flat. Old friend. Then she asked if I didn't think this was a little inappropriate. Inappropriate. As if I'd done something wrong. As if I hadn't spent 37 years doing everything right. Michael was worse. He called that night, his voice tight. Sarah had told him I'd been seeing someone, some guy from before I married his father. I tried to explain I wasn't seeing anyone, that I was just... He cut me off, asked what I was just doing. Moving on, said his father had only been gone 5 years. 5 years. As if that wasn't long enough, as if the 32 years before that counted for something. I told him carefully that I was 65 years old, that I was allowed to have coffee with an old friend. He said Thomas wasn't just a friend, and I knew it. His voice cracked. He told me they needed me, that the kids needed their grandmother, that Sarah was going through a hard time at work, that they couldn't handle me changing everything right now. I stood in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, and felt something shift inside me, a small crack in the wall I'd built around myself all those years ago. I asked him what if I needed something different. There was a long silence. Then Michael said the word that would stay with me for weeks. Selfish. The word hit me like cold water. I'd given up Thomas to raise his children. I'd married his father to give them stability. I'd moved into their house, slept in a separate bedroom, played the part of wife and mother without ever really being either. And now, at 65, wanting something for myself made me selfish. I hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd helped Sarah with her homework, where I'd taught Michael to tie his shoes, where David and I had shared quiet breakfasts, two people bound by duty and grief, but never by love. Caroline's apron was hanging on the hook by the door. I got up and took it down, folded it carefully, put it in a drawer. Then I called Thomas. I told him I wanted to see him, really see him, not just coffee, not just walks in the park. He asked what had changed. I told him I had, or maybe I just remembered who I was before I became someone else. We started meeting more often after that. Dinners, movies, long drives with the windows down, the kind we used to take when we were young. Sarah stopped calling. Michael sent short, clipped texts about the kids' school events, things he thought I should attend. They didn't ask about Thomas, and I didn't tell them. But I could feel their disapproval, like a weight on my shoulders. One afternoon, Thomas and I were sitting on his porch, drinking iced tea and watching the sun sink low behind the trees. He mentioned that my family seemed angry with me. It wasn't a question. I agreed they thought I was abandoning them. He asked if I looked at him and asked if it was really abandonment to finally choose myself after spending 37 years putting them first. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. He reminded me I'd raised them, loved them, given them everything, said that didn't disappear, just because I was living my own life now. But it felt like it might. Sarah's birthday came and went. I sent a card. She didn't call. Michael's youngest started kindergarten. I heard about it from a neighbor. I told myself it was their choice to pull away, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. But late at night, lying in my bed, I felt the familiar weight of guilt pressing down on my chest. Thomas felt it too. He suggested one evening that maybe we should slow down, said he didn't want to be the reason my family fell apart. I told him firmly he wasn't, that they were falling apart because they couldn't accept that I was more than just their Aunt Becca, more than just the woman who filled in when their mother died. He asked gently what I was. Then I looked at him and said I was the woman who'd loved him 37 years ago and never stopped. The words hung in the air between us. Truth, I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't there. Thomas stood up, crossed the porch, and pulled me into his arms. And for the first time in decades, I let myself cry. Not for Caroline, not for David, not even for Sarah and Michael. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who thought love was supposed to feel like breathing, easy, natural, right. I cried for all the years I'd spent being someone else, playing a part, filling a space. And when I was done crying, I looked up at Thomas and told him I wasn't stopping. Not for them, not for anyone. He kissed my forehead, soft and careful, like I was something precious. That night, I drove home past the old house, the one where I'd raised Sarah and Michael, where David and I had lived separate lives under the same roof. The porch light was on, the same way I used to leave it, but it wasn't mine anymore. Hadn't been for a long time. I kept driving. When I got home, I opened the drawer where I'd put Caroline's apron. I took it out, held it for a moment, felt the weight of all those years in the faded cotton. Then I folded it one last time and put it in a box. Not to forget, just to stop carrying. Sarah called 2 weeks later. Her voice was small. She said the kids missed me. I told her I missed them too. She asked if we could talk in person. We met at the park, just the two of us. She looked older than I remembered, tired, but still my Sarah, the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she had nightmares. She apologized quietly for what she'd said, for pulling away. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She continued, saying she'd always seen me as her mother's replacement, like I existed just for them, that she'd never thought about what I gave up, what I wanted. I told her I'd wanted to take care of her, that part was real. She said softly that it wasn't all I wanted. I looked at her and admitted no, it wasn't. She reached across the bench, took my hand, and asked me to tell her about Thomas. So I did. I told her about falling in love at 28, about the coffee dates, and the Tuesday nights, and the plans we'd made. I told her about the phone call from Caroline, about the promise I'd made, about walking away from Thomas because my sister needed me more. She asked if I'd ever regretted it. I thought about that, about all the moments I'd spent wondering what if, about the nights I'd lain awake in the guest room, listening to David's soft snoring from down the hall. I admitted sometimes, but told her I'd never regretted her, or Michael, that they were worth it. She said softly that they weren't kids anymore, that I deserved to be happy. I felt something loosen in my chest. Permission. I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. I whispered my thanks. Michael came around slower, but eventually he did. One Sunday, he brought the kids over to meet Thomas. They were shy at first, unsure of this stranger in Grandma Becca's life, but Thomas pulled out a deck of cards and taught them go fish, the same way he used to play with his nephew. And slowly, they warmed up. Michael watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. Then he caught my eye and nodded, just once. It was enough. That night, after everyone left, Thomas and I sat on my porch, watching the fireflies blink in the yard. He asked if I thought they'd really be okay with this. I said eventually, and that even if they weren't, I'd still be okay. He smiled and said I was 65, and finally living for myself, better late than never. I echoed his words, better late than never. We sat there in the growing dark, two people who'd found their way back to each other after decades of detours. It wasn't the life I'd planned at 28. It wasn't the life Caroline had asked me to build, but it was mine. And for the first time in 37 years, that felt like enough. I looked down at my left hand, at the thin gold band I still wore. David's ring. I'd kept it on out of habit, out of respect. But sitting there with Thomas, I realized I didn't need to carry that anymore either. I slipped it off, held it in my palm for a moment. Then I put it in my pocket and reached for Thomas's hand instead. His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure. And I thought about all the years I'd spent being someone else, all the versions of myself I'd tried on and discarded. Daughter, sister, aunt, wife, who wasn't really a wife, mother who wasn't really a mother. But here, now, with Thomas's hand in mine and the fireflies dancing in the yard, I was just Becca. And that was the truest thing I'd been in a very long time.